I was just wondering how ethnographic the study of music can be to evoke context itself, you know, the whole stream of consciousness kind of technique, which can bring so much to the table, right? So when you started out, when both of you all started out your presentations, you started with music as a this complex thing. You know, you had all these realms around it, and then your experiments, of course, you led on to focus. You know, as your presentations went ahead, we focused on something, and we zeroed in on something. It became a very precise kind of revelation. So that triggered certain questions in me. The one very interesting thing, a takeaway for me is music as an effective framework to process anything, right? In your case, it could be depression, it could be dementia, it could be emotions, coping up therapy, but music as an effective framework to look at anything, right? That was another big takeaway for me. And based on this, I'll start with the first question. When I looked at your 9 emotions, right? That's a very nice slide. We also have Navarasa in our tradition, and I don't know. I always learnt Navarasa in English, right? So the Tamil equivalent or the Telugu equivalent or whatever of those Navarasas could be richer, right? Language is rich, right? So in English, they all sounded very standard: anger, lust, surprise, disgust, so on. And you mentioned a few terms that was quite surprising, like transcendence, nostalgia. I remember 2 right away. This made me, and we don't have such terms to express Navarasas in our vocabulary. I'm not sure which language you're using. So what is the role of language in this, right? So we have context, we have music, we have musical traditions and ways to approach them. Where does language come in? Because language, I think, the history of language is probably shorter than music and other things. Much shorter, is about 250 years old or 300 years old. So does language itself change the terms by which we discuss music? Suppose you bring transcendence, you know, how does it change how you respond to music? Does it create that experience itself? So I want to ask both of you that question about the role of language plays in this. Yeah, then I will go on to other questions later.
Yeah. It's a very, very important question, and I think the answer is yes, it plays a very important role. Like, first of all, the whole kind of internal meaning making of the emotions that we're feeling, and we're affected by this sort of vocabulary and contextual knowledge that we have about emotions, which is, I mean, culture specific to an extent at least. The type of knowledge that we've learned about emotions through exposure to, you know, everyday life, and also different forms of culture. Yeah, so basically the type of concepts we have available basically define the types of subjective experiences we have, or kind of how we conceptualize those. And I think also it's a very good point that you made, that if you actually provide a list or a set of limited set of terms to participants and ask them to use those to describe their reactions, are you then actually responsible for partly creating those kinds of responses? Yes. And I think the answer is also yes, to an extent. So you have to be sort of very careful in that selection that you're making, because not only are you limiting what you can measure by the selection of those terms, but you're also sort of priming the participant to interpret their responses in that way. And there was an interesting study done by a colleague back in University of Jyväskylä, Henna-Riikka Peltola, who was looking at sort of this social construction of emotional experience and negotiation. Like, if you're listening to a piece of music in a group and you're discussing about your emotional experience, and after sort of exchanging your experiences with other people, you know, you might have differing responses, but then when you listen to the same piece of music again the second time, people were actually affected by how other people heard or how they interpreted the music. So I think that's definitely a phenomenon that is there. Yeah.
And I might also add to the idea of, I think you can hear me, yeah, or not. Yeah, you never know what this means. Well, so the language also is limited to some sense, in a way that we often, when we experience music and art, we might feel that this goes beyond words. It touches something beyond words, and it's not really able to. We're not able to verbalize what we actually feel, and it's sometimes very difficult. And in music psychology research, for instance, there's this recent interest in understanding the pleasure of sad music. Why do we like so much the tragedy in music and art, and why is it? And partly, I think it's also that thinking of this liking sadness is as a paradox, is also a simplification due to language, that the experience is much more than just the music, that us enjoying sadness. There is actually all of these different nuances in there which are maybe not so easily graspable by words like simple words like sadness. And so we also, how we conceptualize things, we do that by words, but sometimes the experience is more nuanced.
Okay, yeah, we can take some questions and then I'll go on to my next question. Yes. Mike? No need? Okay.
About language and, I mean, it's spoken in, if you take Sanskrit concept of Navarasas, Sanskrit is a language where it's, there are shades, sensitive shades of meaning for every word, and that can be synonyms. And suppose Dr. Jayachandran can tell you more about it. Is he around there? I mean, like a word
can
like
share 'em.
Vibhatsa doesn't mean just that. It means so many. There's shades
Yes.
of meaning to it. So,
Actually, as Madam quotes that, yes, the construct, it's a kind of an ensemble. It's not the actual pinpointed outcome. It's like an ensemble which we say vibhava, anubhava, and vyabhichari. They are like technical terms which could construct a kind of an outcome in the audience. So we classify them as 8, as one text would classify them as 8, another would call it as 9. They are not one specified emotion. Actually, they are not emotions. They are trans emotions, they call, and they're kind of something which is evoked by and large. It's a little more complex, but emotions would lead to something final moment. Something equivalent in Poetics of Aristotle is what mentioned as catharsis. That's one kind of a discussion if you say some equivalence to it. So that is what, rasa is not actually an emotion. Bhava is emotion actually. Rasa is, can be called as a sentiment. Is there a common sentiment by the end of the conversation in the entire hall? That can be anyway qualified or even quantified. Such a discussion is called rasa. So that is a little more abstract, and it also borders in something called propriety, of what is the ratio and proportion, what's happening on the stage vis-a-vis of the stage. So that's a construct actually.
Such a play of language, no?
Yes.
What you just said.
Yes.
It's a play of language vis-a-vis play of ideas.
Yeah.
It's a play of ideas which are being perhaps... there is a sense of ideas in it. There's a flow of sense of ideas in it. That it is not one specific. The idea of rasa is different from ideology of rasa and practice of rasa. As we would popularly give a common thing, the idea of Marx is different from ideology of Marx and the practice of Marx. Perhaps the practice and the idea are loggerheads with each other. Same is also possible such abstract. Interestingly, such constructs, even in the Greek texts or even in Indic texts, they have these abstractions which has been the pivotal centers, like they based on something called justice, something called eusebia, as one of the Plato's dialogue would call, and here we call it as dharma, the code of dharma, of justice, we want to call piety. Is there a piety off the stage in music and on the stage in music? So these are like eternal questions. How do you define justice? And is it subjective or objective? So these has been main pivotal issues in terms of music listening, mass music listening, and play, theater, and dance performances, performation across the world, I believe.
I mean, I could maybe comment on the complexity of emotional, even emotional seems like a inadequate word to the maybe affective realm of experience. It's so multiple. It was very nice with Jonna, you showed in the how currently the emotions are described as like a continuum from different colors to others. So there is a difference between the emotions, but also there might be a dimension of time, that emotions are not just so that from happiness to sadness as a concept, but in how we move in our experience, it's a time dependent. And then there is this level of meta level understanding, kind of where I'm feeling one thing and then I'm feeling something about feeling that way, and then I'm understanding that how those feelings relate to each other, and then the social relatedness comes into play. So there are lots of these color shade dimensions of different emotions as moving in time as an experience, and in at the level of meta and micro experience. So it's
Interestingly, here in the popular culture, green is a color for love. In the theater traditions, green is for love, and red is for actually valor. It's not just for anger, for valor actually. So there are, it was a very interesting spectrum you draw down, especially in that particular slide. One can easily relate to it, and whatever we call as raga in Indian music system means color. So that's what the word raga is, not anything to do with verbalized or articulated sound. It is directly to do with something to do with visual cognition of color actually. Rag means color. It's not music.
Okay, I'll move on to the next question, and then this is after my own heart. I was intrigued when I was hearing both your presentations, how you talk about neural responses to music, and it becomes something that's out of the realm of the social or whatever, and it becomes a bodily, embodied response to sounds. Now, today, of course, we live in a world where technology has mediated so much of the sounds, right? And we have seen music directors in popular music, especially in India, how technology has invaded that sphere and defining certain musical genres. Big thing. And even amongst the young people, they are experiencing music digitally. They are on platforms that is virtual which is mediating their musical experience, so on and so forth. So my question is about technology in music. One is, how do you study when something that is made, mediated only by instruments that are analog, right? They are not digitized. They are also technologies, but they are not digital technologies where the music remains at a certain realm. Whether you want to call it pure or something else, that I leave it to you. So when technology starts mediating, what is the impact? The first kind of impact I want to know is, neurally, does it create some affect there, right? How does the body respond to music where technology is mediating? There are certain pitches, certain sounds that enter it, right? Which otherwise doesn't. And the other question is kind of more socio-technical. how do you look at the affordance of technology itself in expanding this affectation or expanding this musical sphere of influence, so on and so forth? So two kinds of questions. I'm really curious about this. You know, so that is my second question. So, if anybody wants to add, or maybe you can respond.
Yeah, sure. I can try and start at least. I mean, which is a really interesting question. Also, kind of from the perspective that I was presenting of understanding music as intentional human action, and originally as bodily action. Since, I mean, all basically acoustic instruments and human voice, I mean, it involves some sort of bodily action in order to produce that sound. But now, obviously, yeah, with kind of music technology, synthesized sound, we kind of have lost that really sort of immediate connection. But I would still say, I mean, since that's the neural framework that we have built in, I think we use the same processes nevertheless to make sense of sounds that are not natural, in the sense that they haven't been produced by human bodily movement, but they're still produced by human action, or they are intentional human actions in the sense that someone has created those sounds with a purpose of communicating a certain thing. What else did I want to say? Sort of like, for example, something like embodied cognition of sounds. Like it's not just this sort of matching of gesture, but also in terms of making sense of rhythm, beat-based rhythm. We use the motor system to sort of understand beat-based rhythms. No matter if they are, synthesized drum sounds or actually produced by human bodily action. And also like musical instruments, I mean, they don't, like something like the violin, for example, it sort of exceeds the abilities of a human voice, but still it's almost like a hyper-expressive version of a human voice. So it's actually, I think we can, with technological means, we can sometimes amplify those features of like human vocal expression that we find expressive, and just find sort of new means and ways of capitalizing on those. I could continue about the whole technological mediation and virtual stuff, but I don't know do you want to jump in?
If I think of technology, it is a medium. Kind of, it's always in a place of medium. So whether we write on a pen to paper or we type, we do it through some medium, but maybe the content of what we do is what matters. But on the other hand, technology does allow a lot of new things that were not there earlier. Let's say 20 years ago, it was a big thing how, for instance, MP3 players and headphone listening allowed a completely new way of using music as your personal resource in your daily life. It was a massive kind of change of how music transformed into being something that with you can create a personal space no matter where you are. You can have your own world of sound around you. These days, the sharing of music, like when you can publish your Spotify list and sort of other people can see what you listen to, and that way you kind of socially share musical experiences and your identity. Actually, people, it's a horrible thing if your mother goes and listens to your Spotify list, because then your profile is ruined forever. So it is also a form of social expression of who we are and what we do with music, and there are lots of new interesting affordances in terms of how technology allows us to use music as an extension of who we are and how we relate to other people, and I think there's a lot of new potential that we can benefit from.
Yeah. So in addition to what Suvi said, I just had one comment, which was that music, this is also in relation to your previous question, which was whether language uh, makes something different about the music. I would sort of argue that music itself is a language, just not a language where you can communicate very objectively in. Like it's a language where you can express more, but whether or not that signal passes to the other person as you intended exactly is not clear. It's like on a scale of ambiguity, you can go from abstract art or music towards mathematics in terms of languages, in a sense. So if you have technology, then technology is just added in a sense a vocabulary to this language of music additionally. Plus it provides bookkeeping as the Spotify playlist, etc. So yeah.
There's a question then.
Adding on to what your question was, the curiosity about how we perceive with the improvement of technology. A very interesting thing which I would like to point out is, earlier you had instruments, now you're doing it electronically, okay, but the way technology is progressing is it's trying to move towards spatial sounds right now. Okay, so if I am speaking right now, you're hearing it equally on all the sides, right? But if in spatial sound, if someone is sitting on that side, right, and if they're only hearing it from their right? So this kind of an environment is what is being generated right now. And as this technology is progressing, the way the brain perceives it is always going to be the same. For example, if you take a look at what virtual reality is doing right now, right? It's all about the experience. It's not about how detailed the thing is. We perceive the experience. So in a similar way, when we're talking about music, we are perceiving the experience of sound. So that the way how the brain is going to perceive neurologically is going to be the same. But technology is going to advance that a little more further and make it more realistic in the way the experience is felt.
We'll have to vouch
Yeah,
for that.
yeah. I mean, I completely agree, and oftentimes the technology allows us to get back closer to the genuine experience in a way, like you described. That it's not like your sound everywhere, but your sound as a more realistic, just enhanced, but becoming more real. And often this kind of development is and should be guided by how our brain is wired to process, and understanding how the brain processes things is essential for that kind of development.
Is there time for one more meta question from me? Or should we take questions from them? More questions on this technology? Okay, I have one last
Just have to make a small comment. I'm a digital music composer, so I deal with this on a daily basis, and this is a question that I get a lot from my own clients. The confusion when it comes to music coming organically from naturally played instruments versus music created via digital tools and software instruments. And the thing is, it's not one thing replacing the other. They're coexisting at this time. It's just that since it's a new thing, and there is a lot of experimentation going on with sounds being used as a musical tool. There have been artists over the past few decades, I mean, this is not a recent thing, where they've been using sound to enhance the music parts. One example, prime example would be Pink Floyd, where they would use a lot of sound effects and use guitar as not as an instrument, but as a sound effect in some of their tracks, enhancing the experience of the song itself. And as far as the quality of music coming from digital instruments is concerned, another example is Chariots of Fire by Vangelis, which is considered as good as any piece of modern classical music. It is a piece of music which is actually played by London and Helsinki Symphony Orchestra. So it has that kind of caliber, and it was the original version was created entirely using synthesizers. So it comes down to what the composer intends to do with the tool, with the technology at hand. I deal with a lot of soundscapes, and people are experiencing something which we are now creating sounds which have never been heard before, and people are experiencing it not as just music, but as a sonic experience. It's a little bit different. It's not entirely music, it's a sonic experience. It's like what you see, like special effects in a movie. Like you have visual special effects, you have sound effects, and some people are just going for the sonic experience of that, and they're responding to that emotionally. You can listen to it and you'll never feel that, okay, this doesn't sound like music to me, this sounds like noise or sound effects. But we are not trying to classify it purely as music. So the boundaries are actually getting blurred because of this advent of new technology. We are venturing into a new territory which mankind has never seen before. So it's natural to, these kind of questions they get posed.
Me being an old timer, I don't understand all this, but even today in UK, I believe they they believe in live music in hospitals. And that's a big thing. There's soul in it.